All right, looks like we are live.
Right? We have, let's see who's coming. We have people. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Today, I am hoping to focus on some electoral contests that haven't actually gotten a ton of national press this year, but could end up being pivotal in what's turning out to be a pretty, competitive election year. These races I'm talking about are all in the state of Iowa, the Hawkeye state. Iowa has a reputation, of course, for being pretty red these days. Trump won the state by 13 points in 2024. All four of its House members are Republicans, so are both its senators, its governor, both chambers of the state house. This hasn't always been true, of course. Barack Obama won Iowa twice. Tom Harkin represented it in the Senate up until about a decade ago. Iowa was famously the first state in the Midwest to legalize same-sex marriage. But it did shift pretty Republican in the Trump era. However, we are seeing a number of significant races within the state that are looking very competitive this year. These include the U.S. Senate race. They include 2 or 3 U.S. House races in a year when control of both chambers is really up for grabs. So this seems like it's I think worth some attention. To discuss all this, I am really fortunate to be joined by political reporter Laura Belin. She is a person who has explained a great deal about Iowa politics to me across 2 election cycles and is a recognized national expert in this area. Laura is the main writer and editor for the blog/newsletter Bleeding Heartland, which is an outstanding resource on Iowa politics, and I encourage you to read it. She is broadly seen as one of the top political reporters in the state. She's also been active in Iowa politics for decades, at least since, I believe, caucusing for Paul Simon in 1988 with the bow tie. Laura, thanks so much for joining today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Seth.
So, if you're cool with it, I'd like to just go through some of the key competitive races, kind of set them up and get some insight from you about what's going on here, what we should be looking for. Time permitting, I'd love to chat a little bit about presidential caucus politics for 2028. I want to start with Iowa's U.S. Senate race. Mm-hmm. U.S. Senator Joni Ernst is stepping down after more than a decade in the Senate. And there is now a very competitive election to replace her. As I understand it, the Democratic candidate is Josh Turek, member of the State House. The Republican is current House member Ashley Hinson. As far as I can tell, Hinson has substantially outraised Turek so far. A number of pundits are describing this as a Republican-leaning contest. But just like glancing at the polls, it looks very close right now. And I'm wondering what you can tell us about what's going on here.
The polls do look very competitive. One thing I've noticed is I haven't seen Ashley Hinson at 50% in any poll. She's been in the 40s in all of the polling and very close, depending on whose survey you believe, maybe a couple points ahead, maybe a couple points behind Josh Turek. But I wanted to mention, I do agree with a lean Republican rating, partly just because the overall Republican voter registration advantage in Iowa is really daunting right now. It's in the range of 170 to 180,000 voters. And so she just starts out way ahead, even if the Republican turnout rate is lower because maybe people are disengaged or those Trump fans don't want to vote in a midterm. I mean, even if Democratic turnout is higher than Republican turnout, you still are probably going to have more Republicans casting ballots than Democrats. And so it just is a little harder. And we've seen in states like Kansas and Kentucky that in a red state, people are a little more favorable to electing a Democratic governor than someone to the U.S. Senate. So I would agree with a lean Republican rating. I wanted to say 2 things, though, that I think are very good news for Josh Turek. First of all, a libertarian is on the ballot in the Senate race. His name is Thomas Lane. He's a pretty interesting candidate. He's not raising much money, but just having a libertarian on the ballot, we have seen in past Iowa elections that they can get anywhere between 2 and 4% just for being there on the ballot compared to having no libertarian, which is what happened in 2022 when Chuck Grassley was facing Mike Franken. And the write-ins were like extremely minuscule number, like 0.2% write-in votes. So the having a libertarian on the ballot means that Josh Turek has a path to winning with less than 50% of the vote. And I think that's very important. Also, it just so happens, and no one could have foreseen this, that Thomas Lane, the Libertarian, his last name is spelled Laehn. And our Republican nominee for governor is Zach Lane, Lahn. And I think that there's a real chance that some Republicans may accidentally vote for Thomas Lane. The Senate race is going to be at the top of the ballot. People think of in a midterm, they think of the governor's race as kind of being the top race, but on everybody's ballot in Iowa, it's going to be the Senate race first, then their U.S. House race, then the governor's race. And I just think that it might be, less than 1% of the people, but I think that all of those things can matter in a close race.
Yeah, and we shouldn't blow off things like people confusing names of candidates and things like that. I mean, that's not a huge number of voters, but like that can make a difference and can who knows, it could have an impact on this race.
And Ashley Hinson, I would call her, I mean, she's a very solid candidate. For Republicans, when she was in the Iowa House in 2018, I believe she was the only Iowa House Republican to carry a district that voted for the Democrat for governor that year. So she's kind of palatable to those never Trump Republicans, even though she has tried to present herself as MAGA. One issue that she may have is that she had a very way out there MAGA primary challenger who got about a quarter of the vote in the primary, Jim Carlin. And he has refused to endorse her. And he has said, I can't in good conscience tell you to vote for Ashley Hinson. Now, I do think that most of his supporters in the primary are going to vote for her in November. But again, having this libertarian on the ballot gives them a place to land. And the libertarian candidate is definitely emphasizing issues that would appeal to conservatives. So eminent domain, land use, just the classic old-fashioned, I guess, conservative issues. He does happen to be a believer in a total abortion ban. And so if you're a disaffected Republican and you just think the GOP establishment is terrible, like you'd probably never vote for Josh Turek, but maybe you'd look at your ballot and think that this Thomas Lane is somebody you could vote for.
Wow. Do you have a sense that Hinson, is she on the outs with MAGA or Trump or anything like that?
I don't know. Well, not with Trump. I mean, she has been absolutely 100% with Trump on everything. And she has tried to put no distance between herself and Trump. But she didn't endorse Trump until after the 2024 caucuses. She wasn't out there campaigning for him. She did vote, like all of the Iowa delegation in Congress voted to certify the 2020 election. And there was kind of a weird thing going on there where Marionette Miller Meeks was literally 6 votes ahead of the Democratic candidate in her district, Rita Hart. It was the closest U.S. House race in the country in 2020. And the Rita Hart had filed an election contest. So all the Republicans were kind of accusing Rita Hart of trying to steal an election where she was literally 6 votes behind out of 400,000 ballots cast. And so it would have looked pretty bad for the Republicans not to certify Donald Trump or Joe Biden's victory. But in any case, so there were some weird local politics there, but the whole Iowa delegation voted to certify Joe Biden's electoral vote count. And so I think that is an issue that kind of put Ashley Hinson a little bit on the outs. I mean, she is 100% been for Donald Trump. She hasn't criticized him on the war. She hasn't criticized him on tariffs. So she's not putting any distance. But I think that there are still some MAGA people who don't entirely trust her.
Got it. I'd love to pivot to the governor's race. But first question. So we have Joni Ernst stepping down when she could run again. In the governor's race, we have Kim Reynolds stepping down, although she could run again. First of all, what's going on with that? 2 very prominent women suddenly saying goodbye.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that was a huge surprise. It was less of a surprise, I guess, for Joni Ernst once everything rolled out. But in 2024, I guess, before the presidential election, Joni Ernst was telling reporters, I expect to run for a 3rd term. I love representing Iowa. And Kim Reynolds in early 2025, I was at a press conference where she literally said, I'm going to be running on my record. It was almost, somebody said, Governor, are you running? And she was like, I don't have anything to announce today. But so we all thought for sure she was running. And so I don't know all of the reasons. I think it was a combination of personal and political reasons. Kim Reynolds, her parents are getting older. All of her grandchildren are local. And I think she wanted to spend more time with family. But Joni Ernst, I feel like, part of it was she got booted out of Republican leadership after the 2024 election. She tried to move up to the number 3 spot, and Tom Cotton beat her out on that. And then there was a lot of ugliness when she never even opposed Pete Hegseth, but she just said something like, we need to do more vetting of Pete Hegseth. And then there was just a massive amount of MAGA hatred and threats toward her office. I think that even though, of course, she ended up voting to confirm Hegseth, there was never any doubt in my mind that that's what she would do. But so I think that that was a lot of ugliness, and then combined with, even before this, but of course, when she said, we're all going to die at that town hall, I think she just was tired of dealing with the heckling. And by the way, like, for people who think, it doesn't matter whether you show up at a town hall. I mean, that's a great example of how that was a 7:30 a.m. Friday morning town hall in a small town in Iowa, and people showed up, and Joni Ernst didn't walk into that room planning to say we're all going to die. That was after about 45 minutes of getting heckled and interrupted, and the crowd reacting very negatively, which I'm sure she wasn't expecting, because she was speaking in a very red county. And I think she just made a mistake. And I will say that replacing Joni Ernst with Ashley Hinson, like, I see Ashley Hinson as less likely to make that kind of a mistake. Of course, it also helps that she's not doing any town halls anymore, but just generally, she's a TV anchor in the past, and she's very good at staying on script and staying on message. So I don't expect any major game-changing gaffe in that race. But I know you wanted to get back to the governor's race, but it's certainly great for Democrats to have an open governor's race. That's much better, I think, than if Rob Sand were running against Kim Reynolds.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Open races tend to open things up. So, like you've said, the Democratic nominee is Rob Sand, currently the state auditor. He's been a pretty prominent. I've seen him on social media for a number of years. He's just been very aggressive on that front. The Republican, and I'm hoping you can explain this to me, Zach Lane.
Lane. He pronounces it Lane also, even though it's Lahn. Yeah.
Okay. Is described as a farmer and a businessman. Has, as far as I can tell, a pretty thin biography, no real experience in politics. His win, I believe, was considered an upset. He actually beat, in the Republican primary, he beat a Trump-endorsed candidate. Do you have a sense of, like, first of all, how that happened, and what is sort of Lane's appeal? How is he, like, and is he gathering Republicans?
He's certainly positioning himself as a newcomer to politics, but he's been very embedded in politics. He worked as a congressional staffer. He worked on congressional campaigns, including David Young's campaign here in Iowa in the 2014 cycle. He worked for a year. He was the state director in Montana for Americans for Prosperity. So he's been part of that Koch brothers network. And then he spent a lot of the last decade working in the education space. He started a private school with support from Koch family money down in Wichita, Kansas. So he was primarily living in Kansas for a number of years and only moved to Iowa a couple of years ago, just in time to establish residency to be able to run for governor. So it was definitely an upset against Randy Feenstra, worst candidate I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I just don't know how you could blow it as badly as Randy Feenstra. But when you say, like, Trump endorsed candidate, I mean, he was endorsed, but that was more like a salvage operation by Trump a few days before the primary, when we still don't know who convinced Trump to endorse Randy Feenstra. But if Trump had endorsed, like, a year earlier or 6 months earlier, maybe Lane doesn't even get in the race, or certainly doesn't catch fire in the race. I think that by the time Trump endorsed Randy Feenstra, there was just too much hostility to Feenstra in the MAGA ranks. But I was kind of hoping for Feenstra, because he's just a very weak candidate. Absolutely no grassroots support or enthusiasm at all. I mean, even among people who voted for him, it was like, well, there's nobody else that I can really vote for. Zach Lane was running as this Maha candidate. He has an advisor, Luke Thompson, who's kind of close to that whole J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel world. And he somehow, I don't know exactly what his original connection was to RFK Jr., but Zach Lane got endorsed by this Maha Action Group. And he's really heavily emphasized that Maha constellation of issues. And there's definitely an audience for that in Iowa. And that's why I'm not sure. I feel like he's more of a wild card. He's definitely less well known, but he does have the potential to have more enthusiastic support than Feenstra would have. And he talks about a lot of issues that you don't often hear from Republicans, like we need to break up the big ag monopolies, and talking about the ag chemicals and the water contributing to Iowa's high cancer rate, and how these big chemical companies haven't been honest with people about their harmful products. I mean, it's just not something that you normally hear from a Republican. So he's running on a change message. And that's why I think he's a more dangerous opponent, because Randy Feenstra he was part of the Iowa legislature when they did a lot of the key Kim Reynolds policies. Then he's been part of the Congress voting for all of the unpopular policies there. Whereas Zach Lane can say you can't really tie him to any of those policies. I mean, he did support them, but he wasn't directly involved in passing some of those. So he gives people a way to sort of vote for change without voting for a Democrat. And that's why I see him as kind of a dangerous opponent. But I would call the governor's race a toss-up, because Rob Sandy is very well positioned. His campaign is very well funded. We're about to get the next round of state candidate fundraising reports next week. So we'll see. It looks like, oh dear.
I lost you there for a second, but it looks like you're back now.
Am I back? Because it looks like
I can see you.
Because it looked to me like maybe the live stream stopped. Anyway, Rob Sand has a huge fundraising lead, or at least he did after the primary. So we'll find out next week how much money Zach Lane has been able to pull together.
Yeah, and as you, I think, mentioned previously, it's sometimes easier for like in a governor's race for people to vote the other direction of the partisanship in that state. Just it's less tied to national politics. You'll sometimes see Democrats winning in Republican states and vice versa at the governor's level. So that's, working in Rob Sand's favor. All right, we'll be watching that one. I wanted to touch on at least two of the House races.
Three, Seth. We got 3 competitive House races. I'm gonna stand up for that.
Okay, we're going with 3. Okay.
We have no gerrymandering in Iowa, so we perennially have competitive U.S. House races.
Yeah, and in particular, like the races in CD 1 and 3, I know, like, historically these have been very close races. Like these are, these are not won by a lot typically. So, like, for example, in 1st Congressional District, you have Republican Zach Nunn as the incumbent. He's being challenged by Democrat Trone Garrett. Nunn won in 2022 and 2024 by just very slender margins. So not surprising this would be competitive given just sort of the overall national tide in Democrats' favor. I'm curious how you see this.
I think Nunn's in big trouble. Like, of all the races, the one I'm most confident about Democrats winning in Iowa is the 3rd Congressional District. Trump carried this district by only about 4 points, and that's what Zach Nunn won by. So that is to say, he's not an overperformer, and he didn't overperform. In 2022, he beat the then Democratic incumbent Cindy Axne by less than 1%. It was a year that was terrible for Democratic turnout, and he just barely won. And I think that to survive a year like this, we've seen the statewide polling we've seen suggest that Donald Trump's approval is underwater in Iowa. And if it's underwater statewide, it's got to be way underwater in the 3rd district. Adding to that, the 3rd district includes most of the Des Moines metro. And the Democratic parties in Polk County, which covers Des Moines and most of the suburbs, and then Dallas County, which has the far western suburbs, Democrats are extremely well organized. And those counties are where at least 75% of the votes are going to be cast. Then you have the 3rd largest county, which is where the city of Ottumwa is, down in southeast Iowa. And they've had some healthcare clinic closures that are attributed to the Medicaid cuts in the big budget reconciliation bill. So that's not an area where I think that Zach Nunn, he's certainly not going to improve on the support that he had in the past elections. So I just think he's in huge trouble.
And you were mentioning before Marionette Miller Meeks in the 3rd
district. Yeah.
I believe, she won in 2024. I think by fewer than 800 votes.
Yeah, 799.
Really razor thin.
So it's a little bit of a different district in that, like I said, Trump carried the 3rd district by about 4 points, but he carried the 1st district by 8.5 points. So this is more a matter of Marionette Miller Meeks being a terrible candidate. Like, she was one of the worst underperformers compared to how Trump did in her district. Or conversely, you could look at it the other way. Christina Bohannon, who was the Democratic nominee the last two cycles and is the Democratic nominee again, was one of the top overperformers compared to how Kamala Harris did in the district. There is an independent candidate on the ballot in the first district. He's named Michael Bridgeford. He's running on a kind of centrist, like Joe Manchin. Literally, Joe Manchin is someone he mentions as the kind of politician he would want to be. So I don't have a good sense of whether he would pull more support from one party or the other. I will say that Democrats are, partly because of Rob Sand and the strong campaign he's building, Democrats have a much better ground game now across the state, and that includes field offices open all over the place, including several in that first congressional district. And so that is going to help Christina Bohannon. There just wasn't nearly as much because we weren't a targeted state in 2024. We just didn't have much of a statewide ground game going.
And also, I had transposed the congressional districts. That's the first represented by Miller Meeks, the third by none. Thank you for catching that. Okay, so those are definite. And you're arguing for a third, the second congressional district, which is Ashley Hinson's current district that she's vacating. I believe she won that seat by like 15 points
she's an she's an overperformer. I mean, she has consistently done better than the top of the Republican ticket. So now it's an open seat. Northeast Iowa, it covers most of, so that the largest cities are Cedar Rapids, Dubuque, and Waterloo area, and Mason City. Those are the largest cities, but it covers a pretty big area in Northeast Iowa. And it has swung a lot. This is an area that has like a large concentration of Obama to Trump counties. But what I'll say is, Joe Mitchell, the Republican nominee, is not a good fit for this district. He is not from Northeast Iowa. He literally just moved to the district last September, a few days before he announced he was running for Congress. He doesn't have deep roots there in the primary, even though he was endorsed by Jim Jordan and Donald Trump and a bunch of other people. The very underfunded state senator ended up getting like 39% of the vote. Like Joe Mitchell got 61% of the vote in the primary, which I thought wasn't very good for a Trump-backed candidate. And the Democrat there, Lindsey James, she's a state representative member of the Iowa House from Dubuque. So very similar background to Abby Finkenauer, who flipped that district in 2018. There are two other candidates, probably. There's litigation going on, but probably there will be two other candidates on the ballot. There's a libertarian, Rick Stewart, and then there's an independent candidate who's running on kind of a progressive populist constellation of issues, Dave Bashaw. He used to work for Bernie Sanders' campaign, and he's running as an independent. So I'm not sure how that's going to go, but I don't feel that Joe Mitchell, most people are calling that a lean Republican district just because of the way that Northeast Iowa, the way the partisanship has changed in other elections. But Joe Mitchell is not nearly as strong a nominee as Ashley Hinson was, that's for sure. And the Democrat is going to be better funded. The Democrat running against Ashley Hinson in 2024 didn't really have any outside support and didn't raise a lot of money. Whereas Lindsey James, I think, is going to be able to run a more effective district-wide campaign. So that's why I put that as definitely a U.S. House race that's in play in Iowa.
Okay. Are there other races I haven't mentioned that you think also are, that you're keeping your eye on?
Well, I'm keeping my eye on a ton of state legislative races, but the two other statewide elections that I'm watching most closely, Attorney General, we have Brenna Byrd, who defeated a very long-serving incumbent in 2022 and has been absolutely joined at the hip with Donald Trump. I mean, she has filed so many different lawsuits and briefs and things either to attack Joe Biden policies or support Trump policies. She actually flew to New York to show up when Donald Trump was on trial and denounce what she called a sham trial. So Brenna Byrd, the incumbent, very closely tied to Donald Trump. And then the Democratic nominee, Nate Willems, is a labor lawyer, former Democratic state legislator. And he's running on kind of an interesting message that we haven't heard before in an attorney general's race in Iowa, which is that the office should be focused on working people, taking on corporate crime. So that includes wage theft and worker misclassification. And so, people who get paid for their labor by the hour should get paid for every hour that they're working. And also he's attacking Brenna Byrd's, some some of the lawsuits that she's filed, like against safe nursing home staffing standards that the Biden administration had, whereas we have huge problems with the quality of nursing home care in Iowa, for instance. So I think that that could be very competitive. The little polling we've seen has shown that it's very competitive, and Brenna Bird is kind of mired in that low to mid 40s area. Also, we have an interesting race for Secretary of Agriculture. I know most states don't have that as an elected office, but we have a retired research scientist and writer, Chris Jones, who's the Democratic nominee, who's making this race just a referendum, straight up referendum on water quality in Iowa. If you think Iowa water is fine, vote for the incumbent. And if you think we need to clean up our dirty water, vote for me. And here's why I think this race is important. There are people on the left of the Democratic Party, or even on the left outside the Democratic Party, who don't like Rob Sand and they don't like Josh Turek. But they do like Chris Jones. A lot of those people can get excited about Chris Jones because he is running on a more inspiring agenda with, very much putting environmental issues at the center. And so I think that for some people on the left who might have considered sitting out this election, I think Chris Jones gives them a reason to show up and vote. So I think that that race could be very important, even though the incumbent Secretary of Agriculture, Mike Naig, I mean, you have to say he's favored. Usually incumbents are favored in a statewide election like this. So all the statewide candidates, of course, they need Rob Sand to do very well, but those two for Attorney General and Secretary of Ag are the other ones that I'm watching.
Wow. Cool. Okay. I'd like to pivot briefly. We have a little bit of time left to talk about 2028 caucuses. This is, favorite subject for me. It's never too early to talk about the caucus. I'm one thing that really I'm curious about is if you've seen or heard of candidates visiting the state. And the reason I ask, it's of course not unusual for presidential candidates to take early visits to Iowa, to show up in various times, to get a sense of support there and try to do some fundraising and look for endorsements. But this is a weird moment for Democrats nationally. Democrats have been making a lot of changes to their nomination system. They haven't announced where their first in the nation contest will be in 2028 yet, but it won't be in Iowa. And Democratic candidates could possibly even get into some trouble for campaigning early in Iowa. So on the other hand, there's a sense that there is no coordination point for them yet, and for want of one, Iowa will kind of serve. That is, some people might go anyway. There's a recognized set of party people and activists and journalists already in place there. Candidates kind of know that system. So I'm just curious.
Well, we have seen some prospective candidates come here just within the last month. Pete Buttigieg was just here over the weekend headlining a big Iowa Democratic fundraiser. He also did events with Josh Turek and with Sarah Trump-Garriott, the candidate in the 3rd Congressional District. Andy Beshear was here for the first post-primary rally that Rob Sand did. And he also, I think, did some smaller events while he was in town. So last year, Ruben Gallego was here. I know Mark Kelly. I'm trying to remember if it was last year or the year before, but we have definitely seen candidates come through. I mean, I will say candidly, I'm not a big believer in Iowa Democrats having any chance to be in the early window. And there are a lot of Democrats here who are like, we should just do the early caucus anyway, and they'll come and they'll campaign. And I'm like, they're not going to come campaign in Iowa if it means they can't be in a televised debate. Okay, like get real. But in any case, a lot of Democrats here feel that way. Like we should just have the early caucus and people will show up. And I think right now, with the calendar still in flux, I think there's no downside to candidates coming here. And especially someone like Pete Buttigieg, who we already know he has a very strong base of support among Iowa Democrats because he did so well in the 2020 caucuses. So I think that we probably will see more Democrats coming here to campaign. But I don't believe that Iowa will have an early presidential nominating contest in 2028. But I would say that if there's any chance of that happening, Democrats have to put some big wins on the board this year. Like Rob Sand would have to win the governor's race. We'd have to flip probably at least 2 of the congressional districts and at least have the Senate race be close if Josh Turek doesn't win. Because with Iowa not looking like a swing state, there's really no reason for the DNC to schedule an early contest here. I mean, of course, I love the Iowa caucuses, but it's hard. I try to convey to people here, try to put yourself in the shoes of someone who doesn't live in Iowa and ask yourself why the DNC should have the early contest in Iowa. It's hard to make a case. Now, if we become more looking like a purple state again, then that could be different. The Republicans, by the way, very highly likely Iowa will still be the first contest. And we have seen already this year Ted Cruz, J.D. Vance. We haven't seen Marco Rubio yet, but I'm sure that we will see other prospective Republican candidates coming through.
Okay, it's interesting. Okay, so Ted Cruz is already putting himself in the mix, and he, of course, won the caucuses there in 2016. So he has some base of.
He was here. He was here in May.
That's interesting.
And J.D. Vance was also here campaigning with Zach Nunn, which was kind of funny because, like, if I were Zach Nunn, I would not want to associate myself with J.D. Vance because he's very unpopular. But I think what that tells me is their internal polling shows them that Zach Nunn has work to do with the MAGA part of the base. That's the only reason I can think of that you would want J.D. Vance here campaigning with Zach Nunn, because to me, he is very toxic in the suburbs, which is where that 3rd congressional district race is probably going to be decided.
Well, let me ask a last question on that topic. I mean, we've seen, over the past year and a half, we've seen Trump's approval rating drop pretty substantially across the country. Nationwide, he's got an approval rating around 37, 38% on average. I'm curious has Iowa just sort of followed that national pattern? Has the Trump campaign or Trump administration lost ground more or less in Iowa? Just curious if you see this as
I definitely
really
think it's a vulnerable
moment.
And I haven't seen everybody's internal polling. But like I said, the statewide polling suggests that he is underwater on approval right now. And the Iowa 4th district, which covers most of the Northwest and a lot of Western Iowa, that is so heavily Republican that if he's underwater statewide, he has to be underwater in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd congressional districts. And we've seen a few signs that that is the case, that he is, and I don't know exactly what the numbers are and how they would compare, but nationally, his approval has slid, and I'm sure that it has slid in Iowa, but I just don't know on a relative basis whether it's more in Iowa or less in Iowa. But I think there's a very real chance that Republican turnout could be lower this year than what we usually see in a midterm, because I think that Trump activated a lot of those voters who were not reliable voters and who were really just attached to him personally. And I know the Republican Party is going to be spending a lot of money trying to turn out those people for Zach Lane and Ashley Hinson and everybody else, but I don't know how successful they'll be with that.
This has been incredibly useful. Thank you so much, Laura. Anything else we should be
everybody,
talking about
every state should have a redistricting process like Iowa's. I'm telling you, no cracking, no packing. So you can't split the cities. You can't split Iowa City 8 ways, or so you can only split as much as you need to keep the population equal among the districts. And for the congressional districts, you can't split counties at all. So it really, like I said, every cycle we have at least one and usually 2 of the 4 that are competitive. And I would argue 3 of the 4 this year. But I wish that every state had that kind of redistricting.
Yeah, and it seems like so many states are going, like every few years, are always like, what is the right way to redistrict? And it seems like
we got a little bit of a lucky break. In the 70s, we had an important Iowa Supreme Court ruling. And then at the time, even though it was a Republican trifecta, it was a moment where we had a governor and the leadership in the legislature that they weren't just kind of trying to squeeze, every maximum Republican advantage. And so somehow they developed a system, like, I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it's very good in the sense of making sure that we have competitive, not just congressional districts, but the legislative races. We always have quite a lot of competitive legislative races compared to other states, including states that are much bigger than Iowa, where almost all the legislative races are basically over before anyone cast a ballot.
Okay. So I mentioned, Laura, you are with Bleeding Heartland. Are there other places people?
Yeah, so I am on Substack, Iowa Politics with Laura Belin. That's where I post every week. I usually cross-post something from Bleeding Heartland, but I always post every week my weekly radio show / podcast, KHOI's Capital Week, because I'm also the part-time political reporter for KHOI Community Radio in Ames. So Iowa Politics with Laura Belin. And I'm on the various Blue Sky at Laura R. Belin, the old, X, former Twitter, Laura R. Belin. And there's a Bleeding Heartland YouTube channel where I post a lot of video clips, including a lot of Iowa candidates and elected officials there.
Well, this has been great. Laura, thank you so much for joining today. And thank
Thanks for
everyone
having me,
for
Seth.
tuning in and listening. All right. Take care.